Hello, everyone. I'm Andy, and welcome to Stackin It Up, a series of tech transformation talks on the people, technology, and stories behind real-world digital transformation. Today, I'm joined by John Pates, PhD. Hey, John.
Hey, Andy, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Love the new intro, man. That's good.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Hey, John, tell us a little bit about what you do here at Mark III.
Yeah, so I'm John. I'm a senior data scientist here at Mark III Systems, and I do AI and machine learning. Projects range everywhere from computer vision to NLP to standard machine learning type things, working with customers on a lot of different projects that are really varied because, as you know, this field is really varied. There is no one thing here. It's all over the place, and that's what I do.
Awesome. Today's topic is all about around COVID-19, the coronavirus, specifically looking at it from a data scientist's perspective. There are a lot of data sources out there, John, and dashboards around COVID-19. Which ones have you been following and why?
So there's a couple of them that I've been following. One is that was put out by Johns Hopkins University from their College of Engineering. And if it's okay, I'll share it with you and kind of show it. Great. Give me 1 second and I'll share my screen. Great. So this is a dashboard that was put out by Johns Hopkins, as I said. This is really kind of one of my favorites, and it's being used all over the place. You see it in the news, on the projections that the government's putting out there. And for me, I think it's very nice because it's very easy to read. Anything with a heat map or bubble map or whatever is always very easy to read. And you have a lot of information you can get very quickly. And you just do it by clicking across here. Like, here's the cumulative confirmed cases. You go to the next one, it'll show you active cases. And so you can see very quickly that, there's a lot of confirmed cases all over the world, but when you start looking at the active cases, you notice that they're really building up here in Europe and not so much over in the US. So it gives you a very quick look at the data. The other thing I like about this, and this was the first group to do it, is that they've open sourced all of this data. So it's on GitHub. You can go get it. It's updated all the time. They pulled data from a lot of different areas and a lot of different sources. And so it's very, very easy to get it. So if you want to go analyze the data yourself, you can go download the same data they're using in the background and do whatever you want with it. So it's a big collaboration there. Another one that I like is, this is from a group called Health Map. That shows, again, it's bubble maps, but the thing I like about this is that it shows it in real time, or I'm sorry, not in real time, but it'll show it as a video. So you can see it growing as as time's gone on. So that's always neat for me to see the trajectory that this is taking. Hopefully these bubbles will start getting much smaller, much quicker. That's kind of what we're all shooting for. This is one put out by a group called the Base Lab. This one is good because everything's color-coded, which sort of helps. But in one screen, if you just scroll a little bit, you can get all of the data that's out there pretty much in a very easy format. So, of course, you can see your standard graphs of what's going on with infections. But as you go down, you see more percentages of what's happening as far as increases. And then, it'll even give you live updates with links to news stories. But all the statistics are right here. It's very easy to get to, very easy to read. So it's a great place to go if you want to get everything kind of summed up quickly. And then finally, as far as how people are predicting what's going to happen, which obviously that's what we're all worried about, right? We want to know when this is going to peak, when this is going to end, when people are going to stop dying. This is a group called IHME that has built some models for projecting what's going to happen. When is our peak going to be? Here they said we peaked 2 days ago. If you look at other websites, they'll say the peak's going to be at the end of April, or they say the end of May. So there's some differences there, and I'll explain why that is in a second. But it shows, the resources that are needed, how many beds that are needed versus how many that we don't have, how many short we are, and then some graphs, and we see obviously we're trying to flatten this curve. Now the thing I like about this is, for one, it's modeling what's going on. It's not just showing historic data, but it's also showing something in the background of how in the world they're doing their modeling, how in the world they're doing their predictions. One of the most important things you need to know for any type of statistical analysis is what are the assumptions that are being made behind it. Okay, they've got data, yeah, that's great, but what are they doing with it? How are they determining what's important and what's not important, and what's going to affect their models the most? So where was that at? There we go. So as they're building their model, there's one thing they talk about, which I think is really important. They've worked in this idea of social distancing, which a lot of the models aren't working in, which is okay for the other models. But for this one, this is why I like it so much, is they're assuming that for their projections, social distancing is going to keep happening. Now, this is important because we're always hearing, you need to social distance, you need to stay away. Well, if people don't do it, this model isn't going to work anymore, or it's not going to work the way that they wanted it to. So by looking at this and by seeing their projections and saying, look, if you do this, if you social distance, if you stay away from each other, we can predict pretty well what's going to happen. You can see what's going to happen. So it kind of puts the impetus back on us to, if you want to see this curve get flattened, we've got to do our part as well. So I like to see that the assumptions that are being made behind it, any of the models that are there. That's the very long answer for which ones I'm following.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for walking us through that. So that actually leads to my next question. A data model is only as good as its input data.
Yep.
How does this statement apply specifically to tracking COVID-19?
That's very good. Part of it is, so we see the data that's out there, and so the model's only as good as that. Anytime we see data, we have to question the data, all right? You have to look at things like, there's something called exploratory data analysis. It's always the first thing that you do when you get data. So you have to look and see, okay, well, last week it showed that there were, 200 cases in a particular location. This week it's showing 2,000. Could it have really gone up that much, or is there some sort of data error? So you've always got to go back and look and see, is the information being put in correctly? The other thing to consider is, from week to week or even day to day, some of these numbers may shift dramatically, like the number of confirmed cases. Well, that could be based upon the amount of testing that's being done. So say you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Maybe we've got 500 confirmed cases, but we've only done 1,000 tests. Well, yesterday we got 5,000 tests that were available. They did it. And now our infection rate or confirmed cases has gone up significantly. That's because we were testing more. So that's stuff you've got to look at in the background to see, how the data is playing out. And a lot of these sites will, these dashboards and things will show you how much testing is being done. Let me give you one example. If we go back to the Johns Hopkins one, testing rates. So you see here, this is Louisiana, big bubble for how much is being tested. This is Texas. Look how small the bubble is. So there's a lot more testing going on in Louisiana. And when you look at that, you see they're testing 2,000 people per 100,000. Texas, we're testing 541 people. That's going to make a huge difference in how many confirmed cases we have. So it's all things that, as you're building your models and as you're looking at them, these things have to be factored in.
When you're looking at a data source or analysis, how would you go about evaluating the quality of what you're looking at?
That's tough in a situation like this, because we really don't know what to expect tomorrow or to expect the next day. So in order to really look at the quality and evaluate what's good or not, we kind of have to look back at what little historical data we have. One of the customers we're working with, they're starting to do predictions for their healthcare system. They've only got data since March. Okay, what is it, April 13th? That's 6 weeks worth of data, or a little bit less than 6 weeks worth of data. That's not much, especially when you're doing time series analysis and time series analysis that's as completely complicated as this is. So as you're evaluating, you kind of have to look in the past and see, okay, how well were their predictions working last week or the week before that? If their predictions seem to be working well, then maybe their model is good, but it has to be reevaluated all the time. It has to be reevaluated basically every day to see if it's still working. Kind of by analogy, if you built a model to predict the stock market last year, and you're using that model right now to predict the stock market, that model is not going to work at all, because we've got something going on around the world that's basically killing our stock market. So you have to keep looking at it, basically day by day to evaluate.
And speaking of that and looking toward the future, what are some of the key indicators that you'll be tracking as this progresses?
So for me, the key indicators are going to be, first and foremost, is the amount of testing that's happening. Because without people being tested, you don't know if they're positive or if it's a confirmed case. So as the testing continues to rise, we're going to get a better idea of just really what the infection rate is, and if we're doing a good job predicting this. So that's really the thing I'm looking at most, because I think that drives everything from looking at mortality rate to the number of infections to the number of people that are getting well. It's all based off the amount of testing that we have. The other thing to look at, the second thing for me, is the burden on the healthcare system. So if you have a hospital, how many beds are they short? Okay, so say a hospital has 100 ICU beds. Well, they really need 200 because this is where they're at. There's so many people that are getting sick. So you have to look at that too, because without the proper healthcare, people aren't going to get well as quickly, and so there's potential for more fatalities. So those two things for me are really what you have to look at: the testing rate, and then the burden upon our healthcare system.
And what are some unanswered questions that you're thinking about around the pandemic that you think will be answered soon by data science?
So there's a few of them, and these are things that have come up recently. Okay, all of this has come up recently, right? We've only known about it since late December. But there's a few things. One is from an article that I just read over the weekend, and it said that there's pretty good evidence that the coronavirus was already in San Francisco in December. We thought it was just in China at that point. That's kind of when it started, and then it started coming to the U.S. in January and later. But there's pretty good evidence that it was actually in San Francisco, but it was thought to be the flu, because we had a very severe flu season and people were dying from the flu. But it may have been this virus already over here. So if that's the case, then our assumptions of how it's going to spread could be very different. So that's a question I'd really like to see answered: is when did this really start, and when did it really start moving through other countries? It's going to be a tough thing to answer, right? Because if someone died in January or even December, we can't test them. So a lot of it's kind of a guess. The other one is there's this idea of there's pretty good evidence that this virus may have evolved in bats or some other organism, and that there was something called an intermediate host, some sort of animal that picked up the infection from the bat and then passed it on to humans. That's a big deal to find as well, because if we don't, that animal, whatever it could be, is out there still roaming around, and who's to say we can't get reinfected again? If the thing has evolved from the bats in another organism, who's to say it can't happen in a different one? So we have to be careful there. That's a question I'd like to see answered too. I think there's just so many unanswered questions that we're trying to figure out. But those are really the two that in my mind kind of stick out. One other one I think is that I think we've got to figure out what other animals can get infected with this. You may have seen the reports on the news that a cat has been, somebody's cat at home has been confirmed to be infected. There was a tiger at the Bronx Zoo that was confirmed to be infected, and then some other animals as well. So, could we be passing this on to our cat, and the cat's passing it back to us, or whatever? So those are questions I think have to be answered. So not just necessarily the healthcare perspective, but what other things in our world are being affected, and how are they going to affect us?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, John. This has been incredibly enlightening. Can you let the audience know how to reach you directly?
Yeah, so the easiest way probably is to email me. It's john.pace@markiiisys.com. Also on Twitter, @PaceJohn, and then I'm on LinkedIn. You can just search me there. And I'm going to post on my blog, which is www.ironmanjohn.com, the links to these websites that I've shown you, these dashboards. Plus, there's a whole lot of other ones as well that may be more helpful for you and whatever it is that you're working on. I'll put all those out there, and you can take a look and see what you think. And please comment on the blog. Let me know if these are helpful or if you know of other ones that are out there. And the more information we share, the better we're going to do as far as fighting this pandemic goes.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time. To see more videos in the Stackin It Up series, please subscribe to the Mark III channel on YouTube. Thank you, and see you next time.